Possibly in thinking Heidegger, we think instead in terms of something on the lines of an absolute, a Hegelian absolute. Heidegger says emphatically, we are not yet thinking. Therefore, are we wrong to identify thinking with intelligibility? The moving around of Geist or intelligibility around a phenomena, what does that mean? So let's call that the different looks of a phenomena. The phenomena um, takes on a new look, and those who see it now have a different outlook. Um, the example I gave before, which I don't want to make too stale by constantly repeating it and turning it into a formula, was the Wittgenstein's example of the setting of the sun, which then could, as Zizek says, a poet might be able to bring out that the earth is turning, if we consider that to be the reality of the case. Maybe that's not the reality of the case. Maybe it can be viewed in either way. But then the poet would have to bring out that relativity. But here's another example. Let's think of a young woman in her 20s at the end of a very long night, and she's very tired, and she has the look of old age. One glances and one sees agedness, the look of age, because people do sometimes appear to have aged when they are very tired. So this look, which corresponds to intelligibility, can come over things. And in the absolute, and it also colors the outlook of the one who sees it. This is ambiguous within Dasein. The reception of the look which shows out of itself, which is showing from within Dasein. So we're not thinking of in the Catholic sense of apprehending the person. I apprehend this appearance of agedness on the person, which I had by a rule in the back of my head designated as young, because young and old can be graphs on the basis of rules. How many years old is this person? Are they 70 years old yet? No, then therefore they're not old. Something like that. But it can also be grasped out of the look of the phenomena, so that we judge everything based on the out of the phenomena. Either way, we don't. If it's so that Heidegger says we're not yet thinking when we do that. Instead, we're doing the thinking which has to be qualified, and then we could say it's the thinking of that which is intelligible, or on the other hand, it's the thinking we do with words, which I would venture to put forward that means thinking in a rule-based way, where we impose the rules of our intelligibility on the phenomena, whereas Husserl Heidegger says Husserl opened my eyes. This is his praise, which was said remembering Kant saying that he was woken from the dogmatic slumber by Hume and set on the right path by Rousseau. So Heidegger says Husserl opened my eyes. He opened his eyes to the phenomena, to the intelligibility of the phenomena, in contradistinction to an imposition of rules which happens when we have presuppositions, or any dogmatic philosophy, and also empiricism taken in any other sense but the phenomenal sense, which Heidegger also says the Greeks, especially Aristotle, had the piercing power of vision to employ. But Dasein itself circles even within the phenomenal look, and this can't be I would say, the same as the thinking of being properly. When Heidegger approaches the thinking of being properly, he sometimes does it in the style of oh, and let me add one other thing. If you take it to the most extreme point in Hegel, the absolute, thinking of the absolute, what is the look that we see on the world? For Hegel, the most important thing in the world is the political community. What's the look we see? We see the equality of all human beings. So this has been coming up a little bit lately in the news when you think of whether these questions of whether there was out and out um, oppression involved in, say, the founders saying we founded this state on the manifest. How do they say? All men are created. We take these truths to be self-evident. So this self-evidence, the self-evident intelligibility, which they claim they saw in the face of all things, and the look of all things, that all men are equal. It amounts to out and out oppression that they should deny that in certain cases, even though they say it's self-evident and they see it out of out of what's shining out of all things, out of what's showing from all things, and what is comes into their outlook in this swirl of Dasein, which is not just their brain receiving it, but they're involved in it because it's the swirl of the look of the thing and the outlook are within themselves. This is, I mean, this equality is the highest sense of Hegel's phenomenology of the absolute look of things as coming to this form of intelligibility. Yes, this is the this is the Geschichte, or our fate of being, in a sense, but it would require a science or historiology to say that it was always remain in that look, that look is the final look, the look that we prolonged ourselves to be able to see, that intelligibility. Um, so, in going away from Hegel and the absolute, which I would put together with the thinking as phenomenological intelligibility rather than thinking as dogmatic presuppositional authority, let's say. I mean, something is an authority when it requires us to have a presupposition which everything's built on. Um, Something can also be an authority because we, in some way, um, feel of our own, we feel compelled to go towards it because we favor it in some way. As today, we in some way favor the hard sciences because they seem to have the most concrete reality to them. And beside from that, they're fascinating in what they produce. Um, I think, however, the question of thinking without qualification, thinking with no uh, adjective attached, as it were, no, not thinking, not linguistic thinking, the house of being, the housed being, the limited being, not phenomenological thinking, thinking the intelligible being, so on, but just thinking, which Heidegger says we're not doing yet. Um, one approach that he may use to get there. Sometimes he makes an approach which is very similar to Thomas's Aquinas's approach to thinking God, but there we're thinking theologically. We're thinking of the good. And theologica was a term used already by Aristotle. Um, in this sense, it's in a way the lower bracket, as I'm thinking about it, of ontology, where the higher bracket is the possibility, actuality, and necessity, the so-called modalities taken on the whole for without qualification. But the lower bracket would be morality or ethics, understood in terms of the Platonic good, which has its basic phenomenological meaning out of here's a political community, and can we improve it? And if we improve it, that means that we can improve it more. And the most possible improvement, say imposing a law like the law of habeas corpus, that you can't keep somebody indefinitely in a nasty prison cell in catacombs under Rome or something, but they have to have a trial, something like that. You say that's an improvement to the political order, and then you say there must be other improvements. And this brings us ultimately to the idea of the good. Um, Thinking along those lines, Thomas would say some things are good, and this, by analogy, shows us what the mysterious, enigmatic God, who is the first cause, is like. And sometimes Heidegger makes reflections about this regarding being, but he has to do it more carefully because he has to avoid thinking being with language, thinking being as available to him, as present. But he still speaks of being as being that which is closest to us, but also the most remote and hard to grasp, that which is the most worn out, and that which is also the freshest and the most reviving. These reflections, so apparently Heidegger was of the view that being could in some way be thought analogically, or it could be, there's some wisp of it that we can kind of get to. But I think, again, we have to keep in mind um, to avoid one, the problem of the metaphysics as the theory of the object, or as availability or presence, and then two, I think the question of thinking as intelligibility, phenomenological intelligibility, and thinking as presupposition or dogmatism of any kind. Also, we have to try to avoid that. And then we have also the clue, as it were, of Dasein and the structure of Dasein that can bring us into an attempt to think being. In some way, it seems that Heidegger thinks Dasein, the Dasein is closer, possibly Heidegger wants to say Dasein is closer to a thinking of being than are the modalities in the tradition.